Hello and welcome to the Mac Gamecast episode 55. I'm Jon Carr as always, and co-host Casper here as well. How you doing?
Well, doing good. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. It's our end of the year show, which we've actually managed to do this time. I actually think the last few years we've skipped December. Not intentionally, but like schedule-wise, it just happened. And then usually I record some little interlude PSA type thing just before I go on a trip in January. Which I am going on a trip in January again, but I don't need to record that because we have a show now. And then we'll just have another show in later January, like probably third or fourth week. But we're here for sort of a typical or expected like year in review, things that were great, highlights, things we loved individually, Mac or adjacent or gaming in general, tech in general, and stuff we already know that's coming next year or, hopes, wishes, speculations, anything like that. And yeah, there's also some latest rumors about Apple that are really interesting as well. So that will be the basis of the show. I know Casper has some cool PlayStation stuff to talk about too. That could be Apple related.
Sure.
Yeah. So, So 2025 is almost upon us. And it's really interesting because I was just sharing the podcast with a Warhammer friend of mine. Somehow it came up. Because he was like, oh, what are you doing Friday? I'm like, well, I'm doing this, and that in the podcast. And he's like, oh, you got a podcast? Like, what is it? Like, oh, it's, small-time gaming tech thing, do with some buddies and mostly for fun. And he's like, oh, I'll send it to me. I'll give it a listen. I'm like, all right, go ahead. Here it is. So he listened to episode 1. And
oh, wow.
That was,
okay. Great place to start.
yeah. And it was the state of Mac gaming. So I myself would, I had to scroll back and look. Like, I don't even know what episode 1's about. Like, that was years ago.
Yeah.
So I think it was 20. Was it? Yeah, I think it was August 2021 or something like that. It was almost 4 years ago.
So that's after
2020.
Sorry. So that's after the 2020.
Let me actually. Okay, I'm being a doofus. I should have
done.
Well,
no matter.
Here, I can.
Either way,
right
I think
here.
it's after the announcement of Apple Silicon, but before it came out, then, right? Because the first Apple Silicon came out end of year, like November 2020, right? That was the MacBook Air with the M1?
Okay, 7/21/2021 was our first episode together. So, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think that's after the announcement at WWDC, but before the actual Apple Silicon hit.
Yeah, because it didn't actually release till November, if I recall. So, yeah, current state of Mac gaming. So it made me reflect a little, like, well, dang, it's been, 3 years and a few months since we started running the show. That's pretty cool. And yeah, like what is also the state of Mac gaming? Well, it's pretty dang good these days. And
I would say it's improved a lot since that time. In part because I would say that, at least the way I remember it, that time, like that mid-late 2020, was right when we could see like less and less light ahead of us in terms of like the possibility of boot camp and stuff with the announcement of Apple Silicon and stuff. So we knew we were sort of losing some avenues of playing games anyway.
Yeah.
And it seemed like we were in a bit of a lull where it was only really Feral doing native ports, and we were just sitting there like, what are we gonna do here? Are we actually gonna have games? And then the actual Apple Silicon hit, and it seemed to completely reinvigorate the culture and the community around making things run, and crossover and that sort of thing got a huge boon in compatibility, and more native ports just started flooding out from all angles, really. So, yeah, it was a dark time for a moment there, but it really turned out to it's looking okay now, I would say.
Yeah, back then we didn't know, how well would Silicon actually perform. We didn't have the machines on hand yet. None of us had one. Apple talked a good game, but don't all tech companies about their new stuff. And, Intel performance could vary wildly, honestly. Some games mega optimized, others were terrible, like it was all over the map. So, it was a really interesting time, and it's been really interesting to observe it and, discuss it on the podcast, to some extent document it on the podcast over the last few years together. And our own experiences. And yeah, it's pretty dang good these days. I like in some senses, still without boot camp, there's like less titles, but since so many more titles have come out officially, either from Apple or other studios, and B, crossover works so well now, and the game porting toolkit, which is still not a front-facing user app you like download and use, but if you have the chops, you can do it. The technical know-how.
Like without rebooting out of macOS, I think you can play more games on your Mac now than you've been able to for the past 30, 40 years.
Absolutely. Huge amount. Mm-hmm. And not every day, but like every few months, there's usually a new big announcement. We have quite a few coming in 2025. Just off the top of my head, early 2025 is Assassin's Creed Shadows, February 14th. Control Ultimate Edition, which is February 12th or something. Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition, which includes the base game and the expansion Phantom Liberty. It doesn't have a date, but it's just early 2025. Same for Dead Island 2, early 2025. Those are all like big AAA games that are already, other than AC Shadows, have come out and done well on PC, console, etc. Mm-hmm. And of course, we talk about Cyberpunk infinitely. So, we can talk more about that when it actually releases on Mac, do an official review, even though we, to an extent, already have. But
actually, something that I thought about Cyberpunk, we've discussed a bit whether it's going to be like a port made by CD Projekt Red or another studio or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting on that note is that the CD Projekt Red has officially announced that they won't be patching Cyberpunk 2077 anymore, like that they are hands off on the project. But after they made that announcement, the game did get another patch that people have then traced back to some other studio that I forget the name of, but people were like, "We figured out it's those guys who did it." So there is some collaboration with another studio for ongoing work on that. It's uncertain if it's the last patch they'll do or if that other studio. It seems
like it is, because they did add like some more bug fixes, more customization, like cool cars, outfits, things. Like it's mostly surface level cosmetic, but it's cool. Honestly, I was a little... salty is a strong word, but since I played the game so much, I'm probably not going to play it too much more. And they added this cool feature where when you drive around, Johnny Silverhand will just show up and like hang out in your car and comment with you. I'm like, I spent so many hours driving around. Like I wish he was there when I was doing it.
Well, it's kind of funny because they got that from a mod. So like they actually listened to what people were doing in the modding space and was like, that's cool. Let's actually bring that into the game for everyone.
Yeah. So it is one of these cases. And again, I have no idea if the Mac version will in any way support mods like at all. I don't know. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the Ultimate Edition, I think, especially with all the latest patches, will be really, really good experience on the Mac, assuming it's optimized at all, which honestly, all the big games for Apple Silicon have been. They haven't been like, oh, this is terrible. It's stuttering. It's crashing. And can't run. Like it's pretty dang good. So I would expect it to be as well. And what's also interesting with this, again, we might as well stay on CD Projekt Red. The Witcher 4 was announced, which isn't surprising. Everyone knew it was coming for ages. It was Project something or the other. Project Orion's the next Cyberpunk game. So I forget what the code name for The Witcher 4 was.
Yeah.
But, we're going to play as Ciri. That's expected. But my point is, like, okay, they're bringing Cyberpunk out. Again, in the future, will we get The Witcher 4 on Mac? Because famously, we got The Witcher 2, then The Witcher 1, and never The Witcher 3. Which was an awkward series of events.
But The Witcher 3, at least for the longest time, ran super well on crossover.
Correct.
There was that next-gen patch at some point that broke it for a bit. I don't know if that ever got fixed, but you could always revert back to before it and play it that way.
Yeah. So, looking good anyway. So, I'm very curious. Is this one of those... Again, is this from CD Projekt's side? Is this Apple sponsored? Is it a one-off? Will they then just release their games in the future?
A simultaneous release of The Witcher 4 on Mac and other platforms.
That's what I'm getting
fantastic.
at. I hope that. Or will they do that delayed thing, but they do it 6 to 12 months later? Or like what? Divinity Original Sin 2 took like a year and a half. Sometimes there's really long delays, even from studios who have supported Mac previously. So.
It can be a little bit of a case where we're always demanding more because, we were like, more games, please. Then they bring out more games and we're like, yeah, but it's not quite enough. But I really don't think that we can keep going on with this. Like the games come out a year and a half, 2 years later and stuff like that. Like it's better to get the games than to not get them. But at the same time, it's also a little bit like the market share of people who are interested in the game, who haven't already played them, who want to play them on the Mac is so much smaller, I would imagine, than the market share of people who would prefer to play it on the Mac. But if they can't, they'll just get some other way of playing it.
Correct. Right? Which is honestly all of us on the show.
Yes, definitely.
We're exactly that crowd. We would prefer to play it on Mac, but here's this cool new game we want to play. We don't want to wait years or maybe forever to play it, so we play it,
And that affects the numbers negatively, right? Because then the studios release this game and there's a lot of hype around it, and then they see, oh, it actually didn't sell that well on the Mac. But every Mac gamers out there like, yeah, because we already played it.
Yeah, exactly.
and the studios can see that and go like, well, then why would we bother porting it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a catch-22, as they say in
It
English.
really is.
It's like darned if you do, darned if you don't a bit. Yeah. And that, like, again, things are looking really good. Like, it's positive, optimistic. Honestly, just early 2025 alone, if nothing else releases, there's a bunch of smaller games coming as well. Crimson Desert may be big, Tron Catalyst, Terrascape.
Had the Prince of Persia Lost Crown come out yet, or is that also next year?
just the other week or two. But I think on the App Store only, and it did get a price reduction as well. It's cheaper. So that's we still have. So things are really good. Broadly speaking, you zoom in a little, and then we get into what do you call it? Like, I don't want to call it platform wars. That's too strong a term, but we start getting a little segregation. Like, oh, only some of these releases are on the App Store. Okay, some of them are also on Steam. And then, of course, if they're on Steam, if you've already owned it, like Cyberpunk or whatever, you would just you get the copy. You don't have to buy it again because of Steam Play. But yeah, I am curious. Things are good, but with the potential issue we just talked about of like the sales numbers and how much is Apple sponsoring these games or not in terms of their porting, their development for Mac. How sustainable is that for these big studios? They obviously have the capital, your Ubisofts, your CD Projekt Reds, like they're fine. Although, okay, Ubisoft aside, they're in some hot water apparently, like financially or something, but that's totally different story. We're not going to get into that here. My point is most like Blizzard or whatever, they obviously have the money if they wanted to port their stuff to Mac. They just stopped doing it after Diablo 3. Overwatch never came. Overwatch 2, Diablo 4. Again, you can play all these in crossover and maybe game porting toolkit, but natively not there. So what I'm getting is...
Even though they can afford it, there still needs to be a profit motivation.
It has to be justified, correct, Amondo. Yeah. So what I'm getting at is, now I'm more curious. 2025 is already looking pretty stacked, even just early 2025. Tons of cool stuff coming, all sorts of indie games and other like in-between AA games showing up. There's a good thread on Inside Mac Games that keeps track of it, like games coming out, because a bunch of people watch it, and they watch like SteamDB, and they watch all the blogs and the forums and the little updates, and then they post it there. It's like an easy like one-page read, like, okay, this is coming. So yeah, a good thread on Inside Mac Games general. Bunch of different people post there. So yeah, can the momentum sustain? Can like the sales numbers justify themselves where without Apple, it becomes attractive enough or interesting enough, or at least worth developers' time to be like, okay, sure, we'll throw this out on the Mac. Obviously, it won't do PC or console numbers. That would be cool, but let's be real. That's not going to happen. And it's not that it won't, it's not that it's impossible. It's just not going to be the near future. Maybe
I definitely think Apple needs to push the ball on this quite a bit further before it can keep rolling on its own momentum.
Right.
But I do think it's possible to get to that point. But Apple do need to shepherd it a bit more, I think,
right.
and give that motivation to get us to a point where we have a lot of big games with simultaneous releases that can show the sales numbers for an optimal situation. Because as long as the Mac is considered as a second-level citizen, the sales numbers aren't representative of what it could be in an ideal setup, I think.
Yeah, right? I don't want to generalize, but Macs are already expensive, and I think the average person who owns a Mac probably has disposable income to also spend on games. That I think is a reasonable average assumption. It won't be true in every case, but I think it more or less is. You're not going to go out and buy a $600 gaming Mac. I guess you could now with the Mac Minis, but like on PC, you can get like a mid-level PC for like $700. That'll play most games pretty well, for example. But Silicon is coming a long way as well. We have M3, we have M4 now. The new Mac Minis, honestly, are pretty dang good. You've talked about a bit recently. But Apple, maybe what I'm also thinking, and you're more up on this than I am by far with the game porting toolkit, like the more just easy, accessible, no-brainer Apple can make it for these developers who aren't already familiar with the Apple ecosystem. Here's all your, connectivity points, and here's your documentation, and look how easy it is to do. Maybe it already is that easy, but just the more they can do, the better. Reduce friction, reduce barriers.
I mean, it very much depends on what environment you're working in. because a lot of game developers are, of course, working in these big established engines like Unreal or whatever.
Yeah.
And assuming that that environment already has decent Mac support, then running a metal shader converter that can convert your DirectX shaders into metal or something like that, you're very far along already, and you can probably already run that even if it doesn't run optimally. Just hit build and run, and you've got something, even if there's still work to be done to polish it more, right?
Right.
But if you're working in a more bespoke environment, uniquely built engine for a given game or something like that, then obviously there could be a lot more work to do in that case. Because the tools that they make available for now are mainly targeted towards converting your shader programs from something like DirectX to Metal more easily. All of the surrounding code that isn't just your shader programs, that is the stuff that runs on the GPU. As far as I'm aware, there's not a lot of tooling surrounding making it easy to convert that from whatever game code you have into a Mac environment.
Right.
But then on the other hand, a lot of that is also more likely to be less platform unique. But there's still going to be platform unique stuff there. So yeah,
right.
It's a very dependent workload, dependent on what kind of environment you're working in, I would say.
Right. I mean, let's take Unreal Engine, for example, because as we've... The Witcher 4 is being... CD Projekt Red's converting to Unreal Engine for all their new games, so no more Red Engine, which, of course, The Witcher was famously worked on. And side note, in case you hear a little background noise, there is some construction going on in my house unavoidably, so if you hear a little hammering, that'll be there to any listeners. So yeah, Witcher 4 is going to be Unreal Engine 5, so will Cyberpunk, unless there's Unreal Engine 6 by then or something. By Cyberpunk, I mean Cyberpunk 2, for lack of a better term. Project Orion, aka this follow-up to Cyberpunk 2077. Will it be 2078, 2079? I don't know what they're doing with that setting. The video game is already ahead of the tabletop RPG from which it was sourced from. The RPG is only up to Cyberpunk Red. Yeah, 2045 and Cyberpunk Red. So yeah. But of course,
the tabletop games did big jumps every time. So it was 2013, 2020, 2030, 2045.
Right. Yeah. So well, no idea. There's zero info about it other than it's in pre-production kind of a thing. But again, Unreal Engine in early 2023 did add native silicon support for UE5. So it does exist. I don't know the current state of things like Lumen and Nanite. I'm not sure if those are supported.
Yeah, so I haven't looked into it since like Unreal Engine 5.3, and I think we're on 5.5 or 5.6 now.
Yeah.
But back when I looked into it, both Lumen and Nanite were dodgy.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, you could turn them on. Sometimes they did something, sometimes they didn't when you clicked that little checkbox. And when they did something, a fair bit of the time it looked broken and performance would tank. So I don't know. Hopefully it's gotten better since then, but if it's still in the same state it was back then, it's not a good sign.
Right.
But then there's also the fact that a lot of major like AAA budget type studios, when they work with Unreal, they tend to modify its source code quite heavily to be better suited to whatever game they're making specifically with it. So if they are targeting the Mac as a major platform, perhaps with help from Apple, then they can iron out those rough edges themselves because they do have source code access to the Unreal Engine and capable of modifying it. But of course, the less they have to do, the more likely they are to do it.
Right. Yeah, so there's still maybe a few of these technical barriers potentially for, like, say, UE5 games. I still think it's the dominant engine in the game market that I know of, I guess, other than Unity. And EA and Ubisoft, I think, still use their own proprietary engines. EA has Frostbite, although I think they've maybe started converting to Unreal Engine as well.
Yeah, I still think some of their games are made on Frostbite. I almost said Frostpunk, that's a game. But they definitely started using Unreal for some of their projects.
I know the next Mass Effect project is going to be an Unreal Engine. That's what I heard, like the new one being made. But say Dragon Age Veilguard was still Frostbite, which just released recently. Not on Mac, but in general.
But there's also id Tech, right? From id Software.
Yes, correct.
Bethesda's, and actually Bethesda in general, or Bethesda's other stuff, like the Elder Scrolls, that's also on their own thing, right?
Right, correct.
And I know there's a couple more. A lot of Sony studios tend to roll their own. So
makes sense.
But in terms of market share, I'm sure Unreal is the biggest player in the space, but I don't think that they're like necessarily like that much above 50% market share or something like that.
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of other small players, but you don't have anyone nearly as big as Unreal, I think.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess some people don't like Unreal Engine. I personally do. I always have, even way back in the day with the original like Deus Ex or Unreal Tournament. And like Unreal Tournament was competing with like Quake 3. And Quake 3 technically had the better graphics with ID Engine 2 or 3 or whatever it was way back then. I don't quite remember. But I still preferred, I guess, for lack of a better word, the design of Unreal Engine games, like level design. I don't know if it was related to the engine or the developers. I wasn't sure. I was just a kid at the time, but I always remember liking the level design more of Unreal Engine games, whether it was Deus Ex or, again, Unreal Tournament, or what am I thinking of? I had the name. It was this horror shooter game. I had the name and then it slipped my mind. But anyway, yeah, good tech. But we have the hardware now, especially with M4, to run these things. Overall, there may be some little barriers here and there. What I'm really curious about next year in particular is, of all the games we've already mentioned releasing, Cyberpunk is still the best looking out of all of them, like by quite a fair margin. We're talking maximum settings. So
yeah, I have no idea what Shadows is going to look like when that comes out. I could imagine that being a very good looking game.
I mean, from the gameplay I've seen, it looks quite good. But I guess maybe it's just visual preference. Cyberpunk has more visual variety, so in that sense, it's easier to see in like all manner of different environments. Whether you're indoors, outdoors, city, you're out in the desert, and it's like raining or it's dusting and snowing, and of course you have RTX going on if you can, and you're in vehicles, out of vehicles, first person, third person views. Like there's so many different like visual angles to the game. It's probably easier to say, oh, that looks better from a like absolute technical standpoint. Shadows is a new game. I mean, like the last one I played was Valhalla. It looked very good. But it's also like huge draw distances and often animating like large battles and stuff. I don't know if Shadows will do that, but Valhalla did. So I think there were some technical limitations because like you have 100 NPCs on screen at once and a castle like fighting and yada, yada, yada. So the game looks good. But I think they may not crank it like to the max, but maybe it will. I could be wrong. Shadows does look very good, and I am biased against Cyberpunk, or it's not against, but for Cyberpunk. So
yeah. I mean, Cyberpunk does look great on crank settings, absolutely. Yeah. And they've patched it throughout its life, right? So the maximum settings now are higher than the maximum settings at launch. Correct. So even though the game has a few years,
late 2021 or 2020 even,
its visual representation is more akin to a more modern game.
Correct. So it's not quite fair to say it's a 2020 or late 2020 game when it's really more of, like more modern. So it'll be interesting to see what the rest of the year brings. I don't know if we'll get any, I expect more announcements. I don't know what any other big releases we may get. That just may be it for the year. I say big, I mean AAA. Like an indie game could be a big release to you, to me, to whoever, because like, oh man, I just can't wait for this game to come out. That's either maybe already out or it's in early access or it's coming soon or whatever. And boom, it gets a Mac port. And you're like, this is my biggest game of the year.
Now that you say that, do you know if, because they recently announced a release date for Hollow Knight Silksong. Do you know if that's coming out from Mac as well? Because it's sometime in June, like June 21 or something like that.
The devs have said it'll be available for Mac, Linux, and Switch at launch, but that's old news, so I'm not sure. Right now, it's just PC and Switch, I think. So the narrative has changed. Developers said that a while ago, but what will they actually support right away?
Right.
Versus adding later.
But the original, at least, had a Mac version. Correct. If not at launch, then pretty early.
Right.
And, that's at least the indie game that is looking interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
The original was great. So
yeah. Like Hades 2 just recently got Mac support. Obviously Hades 1, huge success and everything. I say Hades 1, it's just called Hades. I played it a bit, pretty fun. I didn't buy the early access version because I'm sort of over playing early access games really these days. Overall, I'll just wait for the finished version. It's fine. But we got some other cool stuff this year. I think Valheim was this year as well. Huge, pixel survival craft, whatever, open world RPG type thing. And that's one of those games that I honestly would have played on launch if it had a Mac version. But it took them a year or two, and I'm like, I'm not really interested anymore. The group of friends I would have played it with have already moved on to other games, So it's like kind of one of those things where like I know I could play it solo. I have one other buddy who might be interested, but I would have had a group of 4 or 5, 6 people who are like, just go all in on it. So that's some of those things like I want this game, but also the time has passed for me, kind of a thing. But again, still glad it's out. So yeah, I'm sure there's a number of releases that have been announced for Mac that are like indie, and I'm unaware of them. There's always lots of them every year, and I don't mean the like random, not to be harsh, but call them throwaway games that are released on Steam, like some random, adult game or some random point and click idle game. I don't really mean those. I mean something like you just mentioned, like a Silk Song or a Hades, or like an indie game of some substance or potential popularity or whatever. Not that a game has to be popular to be fun. You could enjoy some random little game only 10 people play and you think it's the best thing ever. Like that's not, the metric's very individual, but usually speaking, good games get found by more people, and then more people play them, more people hear about them, more people play them, and it's a cumulative effect. So so there's always lots of those random little, again, calling them trash. That's a harsh word. Maybe it's the wrong word. I don't know.
Hundreds of games are released every day on Steam.
Yeah. Right? So I don't really mean those. I just mean like something a little more substantial than that. Yeah. But they're always released. So there's that. So like every time I go to like new, like half of them are like random anime games, and then like random puzzle things. And every now and then, there's one cool one. What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But no lack of support. Steam's still the place to be. Even, the mighty Ubisoft, after, say, releasing Star Wars Outlaws off Steam, the sales were apparently purportedly so bad, they're like, we got to get this on Steam. But even on Steam, it didn't do too well, by word of mouth, I heard. So, Steam's still the place to be. I mean, there's still good old games. The App Store is better, as we've discussed. Apple's made behind this under-the-hood improvements, so to speak. But, of course, the UI is still bad and blah, blah, blah. But
while they've made some improvements that target games more specifically, or at least larger applications for which games are a part of, it's still a UI that has to accommodate too many different kinds of use cases to be very good for a game-specific platform, unlike something like Steam or GOG or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That can't cater specifically to that audience, right?
Yeah, they're constrained by their own rules, essentially, their own targets. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. We'll see. But it is nice. Apple did a nice year in review and like Game of the Year, which I honestly forget what their Game of the Year was. Sorry, I was looking at it the other day.
They did an interesting thing where they picked like some high-profile games for Game of the Year in the Mac App Store, and then some like Mac Game of the Year thing that was just like, I've never heard of this, and it looks very simplistic, but I forgot what that one was.
I was looking at it on my phone, obviously, honestly, so I don't quite recall what it was.
They've already changed the page. Anyway,
I know. I just went to look at the banner. I'm like, oh wait, wait. Mac Game of the Year. It is Thank Goodness You're Here.
Yeah, that's the one that I was like, I don't know what this is.
Comedy slapformer. I guess that's slapstick platformer or something.
I think so, but it was not what I expected, at least.
I wouldn't expect that, but hey, they highlight indie stuff. I mean, the art looks silly. Apparently, it's more like some adult, like crude humor type game, but there's places for that for sure.
I mean, there's room to acknowledge that not all great games are the AAA budget games.
Yeah,
but given that they've gotten so many high budget games in the recent couple months on the Mac App Store, you would imagine that they would focus more on that, but they did promote them highly when they came out, and also in the best games listing when it came out initially, they had them up there. But yeah, I don't know. It was a bit interesting to me that they focused on this, but also cool to acknowledge something else, of course.
For sure. Like another Resident Evil just came out. Frostpunk 2, which I don't think is Game of the Year material. Honestly, I think Frostpunk 1 is way better. I
haven't tried either of them yet because Frostpunk 1 still crashes on my iMac. And I
last played it on Intel ages ago, and it was fine. But
it isn't until it crashes for me on my iMac. It works perfectly fine on my MacBook Pro.
Odd. Speaking of, unfortunately, the studio, I think 11-bit, they just announced some layoffs and they closed a new IP. But I mean, I don't know. They said they've been working on it for 6 years and then they pulled the plug. I'm like, should you really, as an indie studio, should you really be taking 6 years to be working on a game? That just seems way too long. Like, something seems wrong. I'm sorry. I understand enormous AAA games like your Cyberpunks and Shadows or whatever with like bazillions of hours of, gameplay and features can take 4 to 6 years to develop. Unless but you do have studios like these indie who are starting to reach into like AA territory, but maybe or somewhere in the middle. They try something really ambitious, like beyond what they normally make. This, I'm just theorizing, but I have seen this before. What is it? Daedalic Studios tried that too. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for them. Anyway, it's too bad because I say it's too bad. Maybe it sounds like I'm judging them. Maybe I am, but I also really like them. I'm a huge fan of Frostpunk. I'm a huge fan of this War of Mine. Honestly, it's still one of my favorite games of all time.
Good stuff.
From like old game, but incredibly good game. Both thematically and based in the real world conflicts, and in a sense as a teaching tool, but also as a like really harsh but tense, but sort of depressingly fun survival game. Good studio, and unfortunately, so it's not like the whole studio's closing, but they had to pull the plug on a new project and lay off some people, and I think basically means Frostpunk 2 didn't do as well as they needed, sadly.
There was one of the video game veterans, I don't know who it was, like it could be Cliff Bleszinski, it could be Peter Molyneux, whatever, like one of the big gaming industry veterans said at some point in an interview that when you start out as an indie studio, there comes a point where you have to, if you want to grow into something bigger, where you have to take a tremendous chance, and either it fails and you've risked everything and you're just, taken by surprise and nothing worked out, or it succeeds and suddenly you go from one day to the next to being one of the big studios. You can't make it a curve because of how big an investment it needs to be to make one of those breakaway successes in the big space of AAA-esque games, or even AA, right? And that seems like what was happening here. Maybe they just thought it's time to take that big chance and see where it takes us. I don't know if that was the case necessarily. It might have been a perfectly scoped title, right? But yeah.
Could be. They made some comment. It was some type of story-driven narrative game. They didn't say what type. And they said there wasn't a market for it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There's like some of the biggest games released are like single player / multiplayer story-based, games. So unfortunately, they said like, oh, it would take too much money to like pivot the project to what it needs, fix its issues or whatever. So obviously, I'm just the guy sitting here in my room as a gamer, as a consumer. I don't know the trials and tribulations of the developers and the project. All manner of things could happen, good and bad. But ultimately, I'm sad. I'm not sure what's next for the studio because I think they generally output good stuff. I think Frostpunk 2 was fine to maybe good, but it wasn't great. And maybe they needed it to be great. I think Frostpunk was great. I think this War of Mine was great, and they did some other game I'm forgetting about right now. So we'll see. But anyway, not trying to deep dive one particular studio, but it's just sort of a year, we've talked about this already in other episodes, the like year of layoffs last year, this year has been pretty heavy in the gaming industry. And unfortunately it continues what's supposed to be the holidays, happy time of year, getting laid off. Oh, that just sucks. Not fun. I think they had to cut 10 or 15% of their employees. So not a crazy amount, but still a little chunk. But So that's just like general stuff. What's upcoming? Let's maybe dive a little more personal. Like Casper, your favorite stuff of the year, either in tech or games. Again, doesn't have to be Mac specific, but just in general. Like, what's 2024 highlights for you?
Right. So, like in a gaming sense, I've spent the biggest part of the year just playing Pathfinder, Kingmaker, right?
Yeah.
I've spoken about it on the podcast several times. I've actually finished it now. I spent like 900 hours on it. It's absolutely insane. And it's, just one single player campaign. And there's still a DLC that I haven't tried, but I'm done for now. I'm coming back to that DLC at some other point, but I'm playing different things now.
Yeah.
But I absolutely adored Kingmaker. That is a highlight of not just this year, but last year too. And I think I might even have started it 2 years ago at this point because I spent
you've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah. A fantastic game. I've enjoyed that thoroughly. But now that I'm done with that, I've started... so I've built up this huge backlog of games I've wanted to play because I've just been sad with Kingmaker for so long. There's just kept coming out things that I wanted to play, but the first thing I did was to not look at that at all and go back to like nostalgia lane and just play some games from my childhood and stuff, right? So I started with Final Fantasy 12 that I got the Zodiac Age of, playing that through boot camp. I absolutely love Final Fantasy X as a child, and also Final Fantasy 8, maybe it was 9, one of those two. I forget which one it actually was. In later years, I adored Final Fantasy 15 and stuff, and Final Fantasy is a series that I've always cared quite a bit about. Also have Final Fantasy 7 Remake on my list of things to play, but I played Final Fantasy 12 a bit, quite a number of years, like 2 decades ago or whatever, when it initially came out. But I never got that far into it, and I remember it confusing me quite a lot, and I don't really know if I just borrowed it from the library or something, but I at least didn't get a chance to play that much into it. So I've been playing that a lot recently and actually giving it a fair chance, and it's still confusing at times because the leveling up system, and they always do some random gimmick for those games. But it's a good time. Then in addition to that, I acquired a PlayStation. So whereas you became a PC heretic at some point, I am now the console heretic. But it's actually super, super smooth with like the integration with the PlayStation app on my phone and PlayStation Remote Play on my Mac. I can stream my PlayStation to my Mac and get sort of like a similar experience to GeForce Now, but on the local network, so way less input lag. And obviously, I need to have the PlayStation and the games running on it, so it's not like a subscription service like GeForce Now, but it's my game streamed from my console to my Mac, which is great in case the girlfriend wants to play something on the Switch in the living room or stuff, and then I can just get it on my Mac in here and stuff. It's very smooth, very seamless. We have a controller in the office here where I have my iMac and a controller in the living room, so it's very easy to switch back and forth. And there's a really seamless thing where I open the PlayStation app on my phone and I can go like, oh, that game is interesting, download to console, and it's there ready to play when I then sit by my Mac or by the TV in the living room.
That is pretty nice.
It's very seamless, very cool. I got the PlayStation Plus subscription, and there's just so many of the games that have been coming onto my backlog of games I wanted to play that are just already included in PlayStation Plus Premium. And I got it on like a Black Friday deal, so I paid, I don't know, I think it's the equivalent of like $120 or whatever, but Danish money, so I don't know exact, but yeah.
Sure.
And I just get all these games that I've been wanting to play anyway. So like, I was thinking I was going to play Control Ultimate Edition when it came out on the Mac, but it's included for free on my PlayStation with the subscription I have, so I'm probably just going to play it there because it's free.
Yeah.
Same with the older Assassin's Creed games like Odyssey and Valhalla. They're free on there, and I'm playing Demon Souls, and I've got Spider-Man Miles Morales for free in there. So I'm playing through a lot of the games that I've sort of been missing out on for a while, and now I've just got them all for free. Well, I say for free, as part of this subscription that I'm paying for. But
yeah, of course,
it's a year paid out with the deal I got. So
right,
good time on that, right? So yeah, I'm really impressed by the seamlessness and the sort of, won't quite use the word integrated nature of, because it's not integrated in that it is, a separate app and stuff, but the almost seamless integration between the Mac and the PlayStation at this point, with the PlayStation Remote Play app installed. Because I just open that, I hit play on console, the PlayStation turns on in the living room, streams its display to my Mac, and I just hit the button on my controller, and I'm controlling it as if the PlayStation is connected to my Mac.
That's really cool.
It's very nice. It does only stream at 1080p.
Right.
So that's a bit of a downside compared to using the TV in the living room, where I'm getting a 4K output.
Right, yeah.
The games aren't rendered at 4K anyway, but they are upscaled to 4K. So
yeah.
But it's a nice experience. I will say, I think I'm very input latency sensitive sometimes, even though I'm playing on a console where people always say that you get bad input latency compared to PC. But at least when it comes to these streaming services, because I complained about GeForce Now having bad input latency, and even though the input latency is better with PlayStation Remote Play, all being on the same network and stuff, I still notice it. And it's like I'm connected through Ethernet cables from my iMac to the Switch and PlayStation, and I still notice it.
Right, yeah.
But it's good enough to play with, so I'm happy with it.
Nice.
I forget how this started. Did I answer whatever question you asked me?
Yeah, general favorite stuff of the year, stuff that's been cool, fun for you,
right?
Anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the games I've mentioned here has been a good time. Particularly Kingmaker, because that's what I spent the most time on. But
right.
Of the stuff I'm playing through now, I'm mainly enjoying Demon Souls Remake, because I love Demon Souls when it originally came out back in 2009. So it's fun to try it with upgraded visuals, and they've done a great job making it feel like the original, but look like you remember it rather than what it actually looked like.
Yeah, for sure.
And I have a horrible memory, so I don't have any idea what happened at the start of the year.
Yeah, I'm usually more, and I was saying this to you before we started recording, I'm usually more like tuned in, like, oh, these are the games of the year. I had all these highlights, and I played this, and we talked about that, or this thing was popular. Maybe I didn't like it, but it was like a big deal. I don't really have that this year because I haven't been as engaged in gaming, not just Mac gaming, any gaming. I'm no longer a PC heretic. I'm a former PC heretic. I sold my PC, not because anything was wrong with it, just because I was stepping back from playing more games. I'd finished Cyberpunk, which is honestly the only reason I bought the PC in the first place. I just got sidetracked by like Dark Tide and Baldur's Gate 3 and a bunch of other games I can't even remember right now. I think I played some Assassin's Creed Valhalla on it and yada yada. I still played some games this year, but yeah, I was more probably finishing up Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, my game of the year. So it's like already my automatic game of the year next year, just because it's coming out on Mac, and it's like the easy shoe in. And I could, I could probably talk about it for like 3 hours if I wanted, because I was there like when the game came out. I played it day one essentially in its rough state, and then played it recently in its best state, and also in the middle in between throughout patches and mods and updates, and the anime gave it a big boost and yada yada. Phantom Liberty was incredibly good. Now they're going to base that anyway. See, I'm already starting. I start talking about Cyberpunk. This year, it's small. Like I say, it's small, but Balatro would have to be mine. It's like an indie game that popped off. It's inexpensive. It's like $15. They even have an iPhone version. There's a Steam version or iPhone, iPad version. You can't buy one, get both, sadly. You'd have to buy it separately. For me, it's more of like a light, like, I don't play it for hours on end, although some people are like, I played it for 600 hours. I'm like, well, I don't know about that. But it's just a really fun, like, poker roguelike game. I've always liked poker. I'm not like a gambler or something, but my father taught us as kids, we would just play for like marbles or fake chips and stuff, never real money. I wouldn't want to do that. I did meet some people board gaming. One of the guys was like an actual poker player for money. They're like, let's get together and play poker, and let's just do like a lightweight stakes game. We all throw in 5s or 10s or 20s. I'm like, I just don't want to play for real money. It's not my thing. It changes it from fun to like, well, now there's actual like financial cost involved, even if it's small, which changes the way my brain thinks about it. I don't want that. I just want to play for fun, even if it's with marbles or chips or whatever the heck, or in a video game, single player video game. We're fighting like different, like, quote unquote bosses, and you have all these special jokers, and it's just a fun game. I think it deserves to have popped off. The art style's fun, that pixelated sort of way, but still readable. not like you have to squint to try to see what's happening.
Yeah.
The name is weird and oddball, and it's just made by a single guy. I think he deserves the success. Kind of reminds me of Unturned, that old survival game, which is still being updated by this like one Canadian dude.
Wow.
So I'm happy to hear stories like this. Like, someone made a game no one else has really made. There's plenty of games about cards and gambling and whatever out there for sure. But this particular one presented it in such a way that was appealing and no one else had done. And he found success because he's like, well, this is fun for me. I think other people will like it. Throw it out on Steam, $15, boom. He's like, major success. He's getting Game of the Year nominations, from cool. like big PC, whatever, or big game awards and tons of sales on Steam. It's like, cool. This is this is like the kind of stuff that warms my heart about gaming. Not, another big, already successful studio made another big game. They sold 20 million copies. Okay, great. But they're already successful. It's not like a heartwarming story. It's just like, okay, great. Or if you don't like them, maybe it's not great. But yeah, so like this just guy out of nowhere makes a game probably in his spare time, then hits it off. Like, yeah, these are like the success stories I'm really happy to see. And of course, it has a Mac version, has an iOS version. Like, again, perfect. Great. This is the kind of stuff I love to see in Mac gaming. So I'm really happy about Balatro. There's lots of good games that came out this year. Came out for Mac this year.
You mentioned Baldur's Gate 3 a moment ago. Was that this year or was that last year?
No, last year, but it's still being updated and patched and supported. Like it won Best Community Support at the Game Awards, even though it released over a year ago, because they're still patching it. They're still adding stuff. They're supporting the community hugely through mods. They're highlighting them with like, here's the best of mods with like an official like Larian YouTube channel and voiceover and
nice.
Like stuff that adds like enormous rabbits running around the world or, weird stuff with your companions, just like random things, but like they're having fun with it. They're not being stuffy and like, you can do mods, but we're not going to show them or talk about them or something.
Yeah.
And they're still patching the game and similar to like a Cyberpunk style, but even more. So really cool. I'm definitely excited to see what Larian does next because I personally hope they do a sci-fi game RPG. I would love that. Not because I don't like fantasy, but because they've been doing fantasy all along, and I want to see what they can do with their skill set in a different setting. And they already said they're working on, I think, 2 new IPs, so no more Wizards of the Coast for them. And they did say new, so it isn't just like Divinity 3, though I think they're also going to make Divinity 3 at some point, they said.
I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah, but it's like, I think they're going to loop back around to it like after their other projects, so...
Yeah.
But that's like a future. I'm switching mode from current to like future wish list speculation. And one way or the other, they've also always had Mac support. So either it's a little wibbly wobbly there, but it Divinity 1 was they had Mac support in alpha. Divinity 2 didn't have it for like a year and a half later. Baldur's Gate 3 was like a few months shortly in early access. So hopefully it's more something like that.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate did it was there in early access. Then one of the was it the original release patch for the from early access to release didn't have Mac support for
correct.
Like a week
it was like a month.
Or 2 or a full month,
something like that. Yeah, correct. You could boot it up and you were still in the early access, not fully done version.
But it got to do that pretty quickly. So
reasonably close. Honestly, 2 to 4 weeks I accept.
Yeah, I definitely. And the fact that the early access was already there was like a letter of intent in a way, right? If you are a Mac gamer, you don't need to go out and buy it on something else. It's going to be there soon. Don't worry.
Correct. So more like that. So that's like future wish list stuff. Other big games this year that I really want to play, but I haven't. Space Marine 2, because I'm a big Warhammer nerd, even though I prefer Chaos, not the good, quote unquote, good guys who aren't actually the good guys, the Imperium. But honestly, everyone's a bad guy in Warhammer. So, but that's a really good game. A bunch of my buddies played it, won all kinds of awards, yada, yada. Not that many awards, I guess, but it got nominated for some stuff. But probably my biggest one, I hope, or again, if it doesn't come to Mac, maybe I can play it on crossover somehow or Game Porting Toolkit, would be Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl, or Shornoble. They changed the name.
I could see that. No, I think you could probably get that working, but I think it's going to take some patches. There's a lot of work being done in the Mac gaming space by people patching out requirements for instructions that aren't supported right now.
Right.
And I think you would probably need some of that, but I think you could probably get it to work with some of that stuff.
Yeah, because I'm a huge fan of the original games, going back to 2007, I think. Played all three: Stalker, Clear Skies, and Call of Pripyat, which was the best one. So, and by all accounts, it's really just more Stalker. Mm-hmm. It's not some crazy reimagined game with all like modern fancy thingies or battle passes or cosmetics or whatever. It's like a really old school, hardcore like shooter pseudo survival sim game in like a sandbox of the Zone, So apparently it's buggy as hell, but they've been like patching it like nonstop since release.
That also sounds like an old school Stalker game.
Yes. Oh, mega jank. Absolutely. Yeah. And everyone admits it's buggy and janky as heck, but it's still really good. So it has like 80, it's 8 out of 10, like 81 or 82% on Steam. And that's about the average rating most people are giving it, like an 8 out of 10. So I haven't played it yet. Honestly, I would like, let's wait till there's some bug fixes or wait a little till next year. Maybe I can play it on Mac. All it's failing, I can play it on GeForce Now. So quote unquote on my Mac, but not natively. Mm-hmm. But that would be, if I really got into Stalker, that would probably be my game of the year because I'm just such a huge Stalker fan. Mm-hmm. The studio has no history of Mac support, so that's very unlikely unless, someone out of left field does it. And they're going to have their hands full supporting the game themselves, and they already have expansions planned and yada yada. So they themselves are unlikely to port it. It would take an Apple level, Ferrell level, someone to come along and be like, "Hey, let's get your game on the Mac." But again, that's another like success story. It's been in development for like 10 or 12 years or something crazy. They were the guys who were originally in Ukraine, and of course, Russia invaded. I'm not getting political; it's just what it is. And they had to abandon ship, move studios so they could keep working on the game because, otherwise they're getting bombed and shot at and whatever crazy stuff.
Great work environment.
Yeah, really a little too real. Like, hey, wait a minute. So the fact that the game came out at all and is actually like pretty fun is kind of a miracle in a sense. Long development times are usually not a good sign. Takes 10 years to make or whatever. There's all kinds of like development hell, get stuck in development hell. A movie, a game, whatever, usually it's not great. It may just be okay. It may be fine. But often it's like, whatever, like Duke Nukem Forever famously and some other games I'm forgetting. I can't think of right now. But yeah, so the fact that it's a pretty good game other than it's crazy buggy. And the developers owned up to it. They said in releases and interviews, like, we're sorry, we know the game's really buggy, but we had to release it because like we've been crunching for so long. Like we need the game to be released and we need to like break, then we'll get back to patching it. So I appreciated their honesty. They weren't like, our game's amazing and we have all this player count and buy our game. They were just like, nope, we're burned out. We just had to release it and we're sorry for the bugs and we'll get to it soon. Like, I'm like, okay, thumbs up. Like, I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah. I mean, at that point I would question whether an early access batch might be warranted on the game, but
I agree,
whatever.
and I think they even admitted to something like that because someone, I think a journalist asked them in some interview, PC Gamer, IGN, whatever, and they said something like that, like, yeah, maybe we should have done early access, but like, we were just so busy and this and that, and moving out of Ukraine and trying to get the game done, and so the game, in a sense, is a little incomplete. In fact, their major AI systems aren't even working. What they call their A-Life simulation, where anything out of like your view that isn't interacting with you just goes on, like a mutant or an NPC or whatever, like a army soldier from a faction, where they'll go around and like do their own thing and interact with each other. I think they just patched that to start working, so it's a little silly, but it's a major feature of the game technically. And it's kind of existed in the old games, but they're patching it really quickly, honestly, because they said, they needed a break. I'm like, okay, they'll start patching it next year, but they've already released like 3 major batches, so they're cranking on it. Maybe they're doing it from their homes or something. I don't know what they're up to, but I guess the game, because they've had a lot of good sales, so that must help them as well, obviously financially and everything. So, Stalker 2, but other good games like that were actually came out of Mac. I already mentioned Valheim. I don't think Frostpunk 2 is a great game, but I think it's still a good game. What else was there? Actually, I was referencing Andy Tizer's video.
Andrew did the 18 Mac games of the year or something like that.
Correctamundo. I was scanning it really quick to see. Of course, we had a bunch of Resident Evils, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, Hades 2 had already mentioned that one. Balatro mentioned it. Okay, Farming Simulator 25. I can't get into that. I'm sorry. That's way too many farming simulators.
Yeah, no, I don't care either. But
Might as
it's
well
great for the people who do.
Farming Simulator 2000, for all I know. Valheim we mentioned. Oh, another little game I liked quite a bit was Songs of Conquest. Very much a Heroes of Might and Magic inspired game. You know, you have a map, you have a faction, a castle, you have a hero, you run around and interact, and you get into battles where it's grid-based combat. Although the old Might and Magic games, you just sat on either side of a field and like attacked each other. You didn't actually like run around a map and do stuff. So this game adds more depth to the combat where you actually move around a hex, and there's even like little elevation up and down. Like you get an archer up on a hill, they'll do more damage shooting down or whatever. That one's pretty fun. Yeah, I tested it in early access a bit. It's also on sale right now for quite a bit off. It was in early access a while. I don't know if it had max support in early access. Anyway, it quote unquote released earlier this year out of early access, and I think they've already added some expansions and DLC, and it's been pretty successful. But pixel game, but the graphics are really good. Like a lot of depth to them, if that makes sense. A lot of richness. Like it's not flat, for lack of a better word. And yeah, just a fun game if you like that Heroes of Might and Magic style, but want a twist on it, maybe a little more modern, a little more like complex combat. Cool game, and it's like really cheap right now. It's like $15. I think it's normally $30, $40. I think it's like a $40 game. I forget exactly, but that's another game I'm a big, like if I had to pick another game besides Balatro, it'd be Songs of Conquest personally. I like that one quite a lot. And oh yeah, there's one game I forgot to mention that is coming next year. We've mentioned it before on the show, just not this one. Sniper Elite 4. Is coming just sometime next year for Mac, iOS, iPad, all the Mac stuff.
That's another one where it's like I've actually kind of been interested in trying a Sniper Elite game for God knows how long, but I've just never quite had that thing to push me into trying it. But having a Mac version might be the thing that just makes me okay. I'll try this one. I agree. Yeah. I don't know how different each of the Sniper Elite games are to each other, but I've always just looked at them and gone, yeah, that could be cool. I'll try one of them someday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's mostly you creep around and you shoot Nazis in the face. Well, from far away, typically, with the stance, the sniper. I don't know I think 4 is multiplayer as well, which is neat. And same thing. I've had it in my cart before on a sale, almost bought it. And like, I wouldn't buy it on full price, honestly. It's like a $50, $60 game. But apparently, because there's already a Sniper Elite 5, but it wasn't as well received, I guess. Sniper Elite 4 is like the king of the hill or cream of the crop, I guess. So that's probably why they're porting it. But yeah, I'll probably honestly get that whenever it comes out. It's just quote unquote coming soon, so we don't have a release date. But let's just presume Q1 2025 is probably reasonable, unless somehow it gets delayed. But
speaking of next year games, there's obviously also Civilization 7 on the roadmap.
Right, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's one of the, because again, with the PlayStation Plus subscription, a lot of the upcoming Mac games are probably going to play on PlayStation because it's free included in it.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Civilization 7 is one of the ones that I'm probably going to play on the Mac. I played the past like 5 Civilization games, if you include the Beyond Earth spin-off thing, with my brother. So it's likely that him and I are going to have a few matches back and forth of Civ 7 when that comes out.
You do PvP or co-op, or how does that work?
PvP, yeah.
Right. Nice. Yeah, I've only ever played the demos for Civ. Actually, I got a Beyond Earth review code from Aspire back in the day when I was a actual journalist and not a podcast poser, but I actually really liked it. It was the only Civ I did like. And that's just because I prefer sci-fi overall to... I mean, Civilization isn't fantasy, but I don't find it as compelling as just, I guess, for lack of a better word, the real world. I think the game's very good. Probably, like, I like the city building and map stuff. Where it loses me is the combat, not because it's bad, but because it's not what I'm looking for in a video game for, like, combat. That's all. It's really just kind of that simple.
I think Civilization's, like, I almost never really engage that much with the combat when I play it, because it's not the kind of... It's not one of the victory conditions I tend to go for, because I also don't think it's the most engaging part of the game.
Yeah.
At least historically. We'll see what I think of Civ 7.
Yeah, right.
But I feel like Civilization historically has been in this weird middle ground with its combat system, where it's too complicated to work well for a board game, but it still feels like they made the mechanics in a way to suit a board game format more so than trying to suit a tape like a computer game format.
Yeah, that's well said. I couldn't put my finger on it. Now you've said it, I'm like, that actually is I think how I feel as well. And that's why it kind of annoys me.
Yeah.
But no, the graphics look cool. I'm sure for longtime Civ fans, it should be great. And naturally they always have like 10 expansions planned, so you can play it, the next 5 or 10 years or whatever. For far as we can tell, a day one Mac release, simultaneous and everything. So that's terrific. Even though they never got as popular, I was always more a fan of like the Settlers series. Something about it, that little more like zoomed in, just real time managing your people. It's like relaxed, but also occasionally tense. I also reviewed Settlers 7, I think, from Ubisoft. I mean, all the DRM was garbage, but the game was actually pretty fun. Or sort of arguably like what I would call almost a sort of a spiritual successor, something like Northgard, which is a big game, very successful. And then they've also made a Dune game based on, of course, Frank Herbert's Dune. That one doesn't have a Mac version, sadly, but I like more that style of game. It's ultimately a very different game. Like, because you're not building a civilization, you're usually building a tribe or maybe a city or a colony or whatever. It's a little more like zoomed in, but you still get to run around and you build your various buildings, and the combat is usually a little more interesting as well. More my style of game. So ultimately a different game. Both games you build stuff and you go around a map and you fight things and whatever, but they're ultimately very different games. So that's been more my speed with that sort of type of thing. Yeah. Probably from I think it most likely because as a kid I got into like Warcraft and Starcraft, and all those are very different games, but they're more in that vein. Just something like Settlers and Northgard is much more slow paced. You're not like frantically building stuff and running around purely fighting.
Yeah, I've never actually played Settlers or any of that, but based on your description there, I think you might also like Anno.
Yeah, I've almost gotten that before. Honestly, I've looked at it several times. Yeah.
And if you are into more of the sci-fi end of that, there's like an Anno that takes place in the future, like 21 something.
Right.
I think that fun series as well.
Yeah, I've only, I think, seen some of the older ones, like the 1800 or something was from a couple of years ago.
I think 1701 was I think it was 1701 was the first one I played, and then 18 something as well. But there's been loads of them, so yeah.
Right.
Long run.
Right. Anno, there's an Anno 2070. It's much older though. It's from like 2011.
Yeah. The order in which they came out bears no connection at all to the year they take place in.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. Anything else for next year? I mean, yeah, I forgot. I should have mentioned Civ 7. I'm glad you brought it up because that's arguably, honestly, the biggest game of the year, honestly, by like fan base. That's new for like both audiences, PC, Mac, whoever. It should be anyway one of the biggest games of the year.
Yeah, I mean, if we specifically look at things that are new and not just new to the Mac, probably definitely.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Exactly. Because a lot of the other stuff, other than Shadows, it's basically between Shadows and Civ as like at least for the first half of the year. Because I think Civ 7's like spring, summer, or something like that. Quarter 1, quarter 2, whatever. I think it's quarter 2, but I could be wrong. They told us the release date. I'm just not remembering it. I mentioned it last episode or two. Yeah,
it's
probably
somewhere around there.
Probably, yeah. It's between those two. Like, I'm curious, actually. Yeah, I know Civ is like a giant game. I just don't know how many people are playing it like right now. Isn't there? There's a Civ 6, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Civ 6. Yeah.
I'm only pulling up Civ 5. That's not helpful.
Okay.
Here we go. Sid Meier's Civ 6. 50,000 people playing it right now. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
SteamDB,
But it is also got, as you said before, expansion packs throughout its life that renewed the entire gameplay cycle.
Correct.
Campaign and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, because it came out in 2016. I mean, man, quite a long time ago. But yeah, so many new things. But yeah, so that's cool. Yeah, I think it's between Civ and Shadows. And then the second half of the year, I don't know what is in store for Mac. So another wish list for me that I think is actually more realistic, like I mentioned, Stalker and Space Marine. Honestly, I don't think that's going to happen as an actual Mac game release. Yeah. Whether you could play it through crossover or game porting toolkit, probably, maybe, whatever. Valve's Deadlock, because historically all their games have been on Mac, or at least almost all of them.
Yeah, there was. Was it Team Fortress 1 that never came out?
Well, Half-Life 2 eventually, I think, came to Mac. I can't even remember.
Half-Life 2 definitely came to Mac eventually.
Yeah.
But I don't think Team Fortress 1 did. Team Fortress 2 did. But yeah.
Correct. So when I say almost all, I mean their later stuff. I think, did original Counter-Strike even come to Mac? It must have. Anyway, CSGO 2, Counter-Strike Go, or whatever the heck. Go 2, anyway, I lose track. They're all on the Mac. Right now it's PC only,
PS2?
like Alpha. Yeah, it has to be.
Because there was at least a time where people were playing Counter-Strike 2 through crossover.
Counter-Strike 2. Hey. I'm wrong. Counter-Strike 2 is not on Mac. Sorry.
Yeah, because Counter-Strike Source and Counter-Strike Go were on Mac. I don't know about 1.6 and 2 weren't. But 2 works through crossover.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what's going on there. So more or less, most of the stuff is on Mac. And Deadlock is honestly the kind of game that appeals to me as like a MOBA shooter. I'm a huge MOBA fan for like 10 to 12 years. I don't play them now, but like, a fresh take on them. That's more of a shooter. I also like shooters. I like MOBAs. A lot of my friends are playing it. I got an invite that I didn't try it yet because I sold my PC and it's not on GeForce now. But it's the kind of game that doesn't look too demanding visually. So like, I think it would run well on a wide variety of Macs. Competitive multiplayer game, which Valve does well historically as well. By all accounts, the alpha is going pretty well. There's tons of changes happening, and there's balancing issues because it's an alpha, but quite a lot of people are playing it. My buddies say it's really fun. And from what I've seen at the gameplay, I'm like, this is the kind of game I could play, not like every day all the time, but I would I'd come home from work or whatever, have a match or two, So I hope that actually gets a Mac release, but it doesn't even have technically, quote unquote, a PC release. It's in alpha. It's not even in beta. So, and it's in closed alpha, let alone like open. So very early days, but okay. The fact that Counter-Strike 2 isn't on Mac is a little worrying because I don't know if they will add it. But Dota 2 has been massively updated on Mac over the years, whether Silicon or Intel and everything. So they've kept that up, which gives me hope they'll add Deadlock as a Mac option. We'll see if they do, but
it's one of those things where I wouldn't necessarily expect day one compatibility, but I could see it happening. Yeah.
Probably not day one either, honestly, but hopefully like not too long after release. Their other previous new game, the Artifact card game based, on Dota 2, was also on, I think, a day one Mac release a couple years ago. Some years ago, that then shut down. It was ultimately a failed project, but so more or less. But again, Counter-Strike 2 no Mac support. I don't follow Counter-Strike closely, so I don't know if they've said we'll bring it later. I didn't check into that, but so again, whoops, let's click there. Basically, the signs point to good, but not 100% confidence. Something like 60, 70% maybe, in my opinion. Yeah. But those are my next year wishes, because most of my like Assassin's Creed Shadow, Cyberpunk, Control I've already played, but hugely recommend it. Civ, I probably wouldn't try unless there's a demo I get a review code, but like so many good games are already coming. I don't have much of a wish list. And Deadlock is probably my main one, because again, I don't think Stalker 2 would show up. So it's like a fantasy wish list versus probably what's more of a realistic wish list. It would be Deadlock. So we'll see. Yeah. And we couldn't get all the team members due to scheduling for what they've been up to, but Ted's like favorite game of the year, which again isn't a 2024 game, is Fallout 76. He's been playing a lot of that. It makes sense because he was also like a big No Man's Sky, and not
No Man's Sky.
Oh my god, No Man's Sky fan. Yeah, sorry.
There you
go. Thanks. I know what I'm talking about. I can speak words. And not in a sense they're similar games. In a sense they're wildly different, but like a large open world semi sandbox game where you play a character and you go around and you craft and you shoot and you explore and you get into trouble and no good. and whatever. Like those kind of games seem to suit him. And Fallout 76 is an MMO, which is kind of weird, but also not. It's like instanced.
Yeah, it's instance. It's not massively multiplayer. It's more just like big.
Yeah,
huge, somewhere in between.
Yeah. Like every now and then you run into people. Yeah. Or I think if you can pay for like some sort of weird subscription where I think you can run your own private server and therefore ultimately play it quote unquote solo, or maybe just with one other person or something. I'm a big Fallout fan overall. I never didn't get into 76 myself, but it's one of those games that had a bad launch and then they put a ton of time into it and like turned it around. And
yeah, it said that right in his little thing that it's improved a lot since launch where it was dodgy.
Right. Yeah, correct. So he's been having fun in the apocalypse. But yeah, I mean, Fallout TV show is getting a season 2, and I overall really enjoyed season 1. I thought the ending was a bit weak, but other than that, pretty fun show. Season 2 is already being made, so that's cool. So I'm definitely going to watch that. I mean, the next actual Fallout game is unknown, like a Fallout 5. I mean, it would be after Elder Scrolls 6, I guess.
Yeah.
So unless there's some unknown like Fallout game being made by somebody, but
yeah, no, I think it would be, as you say, Bethesda after the Elder Scrolls 6.
So 2030, 2035, no time soon. But there's so many Fallout games to play. People still play Fallout 1, 2, 3, 4, New Vegas, 76. Like, they're not all the most modern looking visually, but they're still community supported, fan supported, mod supported. They run on, I think all of them run through crossover quite easily because they're not like
super if you go back to New Vegas and prior, you'd be better off running it through Parallels or some other virtual machine solutions.
Good tip.
Because, well, if you run it through crossover, it will boot and run, but crossover doesn't deal well with older graphics APIs, like DirectX 9 and prior. It can run it, but it runs it through like so much more funky emulation layers than it does its more modern APIs, where it like converts it to a more modern API, then converts it to Vulkan, then converts it to Metal, and this whole thing, right? And it also doesn't work very well with the way Apple Silicon is designed as a modern GPU architecture. You're going to look at like 10 to 15 frames per second on Fallout New Vegas through crossover, but you can run it at a smooth 60 through Parallels. So, yeah, stick to Parallels or VMware or whatever if you want to run the older games. But Fallout 4 runs well through crossover.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. It's a general thing. If you want to play something like properly old, you're actually better off with a VM, where if you want to play a more modern game, crossover is generally going to perform much better.
Makes sense. Good tip. Casper, the tech man.
Woo.
So probably what's good to wrap up with is some of the rumors, Mac, iOS, whatever rumors out there coming for presumably next year, which is iPhone 17, maybe a big redesign. Maybe there's a 19-inch MacBook Pro, maybe. And something about foldable iPhones or iPads or laptops or something.
Right.
Sounds a little wacky, but...
Yeah, so on the phone side of thing, there's supposed to be an iPhone SE 4 early next year. I think, in my opinion, that's one of the more interesting phones because I don't care much about phones, so I tend to go for the budget ones.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting in the sense that it's going to, as far as the rumors go, be the first Apple product to introduce Apple's own modem. So in prior phones, Apple has been using either Qualcomm or Intel modems for its connectivity.
Yeah.
And now they're going to introduce their own modem, which at first I think is only going to be cell connectivity like the prior ones and then a separate chip for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But the reported plan is that over time, Apple is going to consolidate Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and mobile cellular connections into one chip. And it would then also make natural sense to introduce that same chip into the MacBooks that already have the Bluetooth Wi-Fi chip and just add cellular connectivity to that. So you could hook it up to an eSIM and get SIM connectivity on your MacBook as well. And all of that would
Right.
reportedly start in the SE4.
Nice.
And then, later on in the year, in September time, we're going to get the 17, 17 Pro, and 17 Air, reportedly.
Right.
To my mind, I'm honestly not quite sure what the point of an Air phone is, because I'm not sure that the regular or the Pro are thick enough to where compromising on the specs of the Pro, but at the price of a Pro or even higher, like makes sense just to shave off a few millimeters of depth. But I don't know. As I said, I don't care much about phones, so that's for the people who care about phones to value, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, some of these rumors, especially like the foldable ones or something, is like 2026 or 2027.
Yeah, that's way later,
intent, so not even next year, but purportedly around targeting that one of those years might be a 19-inch foldable MacBook, which sounds wild. I mean, I don't really understand, like, would it go the other way so it can turn into a tablet or something?
Yeah,
what does that
like
mean?
a MacBook already folds, right?
Correct. So like, what are you talking about? It opens and closes, it folds.
Yeah. So do they mean like you fold it out and then you fold it out again? Like,
maybe.
Like I don't know.
Yeah, I find that mildly confusing. But maybe it's meant to flip around and be this big old iPad thingamajig as well or something. I mean, various PC and whatever people have already made machines like that, like these Microsoft whatever laptops.
But they always fail.
Yeah, they've never caught on in any big way. So I'm curious about that. And something about a foldable iPhone as well. They're attempting to develop, which, like, I don't understand the point of it. What it like? Is it just so it has a cover, so it has a built-in stand? Like, what's?
Well,
you just have your phone and you use it. I don't know.
I mean, there's like two different camps there, right? There's the foldables and there's the flippable phones, right? The foldable phones are that it's a regular phone when it's flipped down or folded, I guess. Then you unfold it to basically be like an iPad mini. So you get like a combo device that both an iPad and a phone.
I see.
Where the flippable is the intent that when it's flipped down, it's just sort of like basic info, like Apple Watch kind of level. Like you just get like a basic time of day, 5 notifications, whatever. But then it's also super small, so like, I guess in the landscape of modern phones, it would be the size of an iPhone 5 or something. And then you can, fold it out or flip it out or whatever, and it's a regular phone size. But I don't know. As I said, I don't care much about phones. I would, out of those two, prefer the small phone become regular phone to a big phone become iPad. But that's just my opinion. It's not really my space.
Yeah, I don't really care. The laptop stuff, I'm more interested in like a 19-inch MacBook Pro. I might go for that, even though it's sort of probably being godly to like travel with. You would have a giant screen to game or work on or whatever as a laptop. Probably that point don't even really need an external monitor. Arguably,
as long as it doesn't do touch keyboards, because God, that would be horrible. But I've seen some renders where it's like it's an all-touch device and it's still 2 displays, so like the keyboard becomes a display, and I don't want that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either. I'm like dubious, like a little dodgy, sketchy about it. Like I understand Apple wants to / needs to try new things, but some of it is like really outside the traditional Apple wheelhouse of maybe what users expect or want. But it could be, maybe it is amazing, but it's I'm definitely reserving like interest or judgment until it shows up and we know what it actually is. Or I
would be good with so we went from 13 and 15 to 14 and 16-inch laptops, right?
Right.
But back in the day, there was also a 17-inch.
Yep.
I would be perfectly good with just that. Then from following that natural progression, adding an 18.2-inch or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would. So I'm probably not in the market for buying another laptop in the next many years, because now I get a work laptop and I have my desktop at home, so I'm good on that front. But if I were in the market for a laptop again, I would always just get the biggest I can get, basically, up to a point.
Right.
But I would get an 18-inch at that point, frankly. But I don't think that they can necessarily differentiate them much on specifications anymore. Because back in the day, the 17-inch could get more performant hardware than the 13-inch, but today's day and age, all of them can get a max chip, and I don't think you could put an ultra chip in there anyway, so I don't know. It would just be less loud, I guess.
For sure. A few other like adjacent Mac things, purportedly the dreaded Mac Mouse, Apple Mouse, whatever it's called, is going to be redesigned, but not again until like Magic Mouse, thank you, but not until again like 2026, so a ways off. But
have you actually tried the Apple Mice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Really uncomfortable to use. Like gives me a hand crank.
Have you also tried the older ones, like the Mighty Mouse and the old one-button mice and stuff like that?
Yeah. And at one point, that little pucks and everything. Those were almost better than the current one. But
I kind of like the pucks, honestly.
Yeah, I kind of like the pucks as well. I agree. They were like weird, like charming in a weird way.
Yeah.
But right now, the like you have to flip the mouse upside down and plug it in. The whole thing's like really dumb. So.
Yeah, but at the same time, I've also read on the internet some I think it was on Macromos forums or something. People, I wouldn't say defending it because they weren't saying it's a good design. They were just saying, here's how it doesn't matter. And I kind of agree with that because you get a notification when it's at like, I don't know, is it 20% or something, right?
Right.
That's enough to last you like another 5 hours or something.
Yeah.
Then you leave your computer, you put it upside down, you plug it in, you leave. And when you come back, even if it's like 30 minutes later, it's already charged up to 50% where it can last another month or whatever, right? So I don't think it's I don't think it's a good design. You can make the exact same mouse in a way where you can just plug it in the front and keep using it while it's charging. That would be better. Right. But I also don't really think it matters that much.
Right. Probably not. I'm more interested in the comfort of it. I just find it weirdly...
That I agree with. That is the bigger design flaw of the Magic Mouse.
Ergonomics, so I'm more interested in that.
Yeah.
So, maybe they'll make it just wireless charging only by 2026 or something, who knows, but for the other part. And, I mean, it's technically still Apple AirTags 2. I don't even use AirTags, but a lot of people do apparently. Supposed to be a new one coming next year sometime. Triple the range and better. It has a speaker on it, I guess, and there's some weird stuff where people use it to stalk people, which is crazy. But I guess if you're a crazy stalker, you would do that.
But the original also had a little speaker in it that could say like you could ask it to ring from your watch or phone.
Apparently, it was easy to remove. So the article I read said. The speaker will be harder to remove as an anti-stalking measure.
Right.
So
they also had a feature that they probably should talk to Google about to get this on Android too. But if an AirTag that was not registered to your device was seen following you around by your phone, because it can still detect Apple stuff nearby, right?
Right.
It would give you a notification saying like, this AirTag has been following you around for quite a while.
Right.
But, obviously for that to be entirely useful, it probably should also be a thing Android can detect.
Probably. Yeah, that would make sense. Still, probably, I guess, so if I had a tech wish, it would probably be an AirPods Max 2 or whatever. Yeah,
we're not getting that soon because they did just update them with new colors and nothing else, right? And USB-C. But I think that's at least 2 years ahead, if not more.
Yeah.
If I'm sure. Blindly shooting in the dark, right?
Yeah. I agree, though. It feels like approximately that time frame would make sense. So not necessarily next year, but like a future tech wish, because I'm perfectly happy with the Silicon range. It's progressing really well. I'm still on an M1 Pro, but I think the M3, M4s are amazing. I think even the M2s are good. They're basically all good. It's like hard to complain. So no problems there.
What I really want from next year's tech is a Mac Studio with M4 Max. That's basically a given. We're getting that.
Right.
But I would love for that to come out alongside a new studio display with mini LED and ProMotion, and then I would be buying that bundle immediately.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
Frankly, if they do that, they also need to update the Pro display at the same time, because it wouldn't make any sense for the studio display and the Pro display to be that similar technology
Right,
to
right.
speak. Like the Pro Display
right.
either needs to then disappear from the range, get a huge discount, or get upgraded to something significantly better. And Apple doesn't tend to discontinue things without a replacement, or frankly discount anything before they've got a upgrade path.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, I would agree with that too. That would be nice. I think all of us at one point, Ted, Sam, UI, you and I, not UI, we're all complaining about the studio stuff. I don't know if it was last year. I remember some episode, like we were all like, get your external monitor display together, Apple.
Yeah, I like the studio display, especially right when it came out. But the problem is that we got the MacBook Pros that have so much more advanced technology in the displays.
Yeah.
And I just want that scaled up.
Yeah.
Without paying Pro Display XDR levels of money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A little intense. But yeah, that's pretty much it. A year in review, State of Mac Gaming, everything's looking pretty good overall. There's still a few question marks on the horizon, but each year or each even quarter of a year, they usually get answered or things become more obvious. Yeah, I'm very, very interested. I think 2025 will be a strong year. What I guess I'm more curious about, and this would be like a year from now, essentially, discussion. How has 2025 gone? In the second half, we know how the first half will go, which seems really strong. The second half, what new announcements happen? Hopefully, more cool stuff. I'm not going to... Path of Exile 2 is going to get Mac support as well. That's like a really hot game right now. They've said it's coming, just not right away, because it's in... or for lack of a better word, early access. It's not literally early access, but it's a separate game from Path of Exile 1. So another big game that people love, action RPG. So like if not Diablo 4, we get Path of Exile 2. Not the exact same game, but relatively comparable. I'm more interested in that future we talked about, the self-sustaining ecosystem and how that looks. But looking really good for 2025. The tech front already delivered with M3, M4, and everything this year. Tons of releases coming. Looking nice. In
like a prediction sense, do you expect that we will get an Apple Vision Pro, or Apple Vision Air, or anything in that range next year?
I did. I forgot. I wanted to talk about the Apple Vision Pro, or I just forgot. Next year?
Because the original Apple Vision Pro, what was that, late last year? Year before? I
think it was late 2022 or something.
So that's already a little bit ago, but it's still not out in every region. They're still releasing it in new countries all the time. Like every month you get, or not quite, but every few months you get a
crazy. It was
thing.
start of this year. I'm sorry. I guess they just announced it like before, and that's what I was thinking of. The release was start of this year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but they definitely announced it end of some year, so that must be end of last year.
Yeah.
But every few months you still get it saying, it came out in a new country. It came out in a new country.
Yeah.
And it's still got an M2 in it as well, right? So
it's an interesting
weird
project. Yeah, they've also mentioned they'd be cutting back on not development, but like production. I think that's yeah, and they need to do something to reduce the price tag. So whether that's an Air or just drop the Pro name or whatever, just Apple Vision. Maybe end of next year, or maybe a WWDC type announcement like later in the year. I would hope for it anyway, because I think that product line needs some juice, like some input, like some fresh input that isn't just more of the Pro and the $3,500 price tag or whatever. They need to do something with it. And I think the other thing they need is more. It's the catch-22. It needs more apps. And the more apps there are, the more attractive it is to users, but there's less users because of the price tag. And it's this back and forth thing where you kind of need both at the same time to move together forward. I'm hoping it is next year, because I myself would probably try one, but the problem, like the cheaper you make these types of headsets, usually you're compromising on the resolution or the visual quality, from what I understand, or maybe the comfort level. And these are also barriers to entry. Definitely. People want a more comfortable headset. People want a better looking visual experience, whether it's like Quest 1 to 2 to 3 and all this stuff.
Yeah, so there's a level where if you go further below that level, you're compromising so much of the experience that it's not worth the reduction in price.
Yes, thank you. You said it eloquently. I was just fumbling. So that's what I'm curious about. Can Apple do that? Or can they afford to do it? Because as we know, product lines have to justify themselves. Mm-hmm. Never mind they're number 1 or 2 company in the world money-wise, because it keeps flip-flopping between them and NVIDIA and Microsoft and whatever. They're all like going back and forth, the top 3. Obviously, they can quote-unquote afford to do it, but the product line has to justify itself regardless of everything else Apple. So,
yeah, I kind of imagine,
not sure.
Like a way that I imagine this can happen, that is that the Pro gets upgraded to an M4 or even an M5 if they wait long enough. And then they release simultaneously like an Air or just non-Pro or whatever that maintains the M2 of the original. And then they just try to cheap out on the material cost of the thing, like make some parts out of plastics instead of metals or whatever.
Yeah.
Like make it feel less premium, but don't move too much in terms of display quality. They'll have to reduce it a little to get the price below any reasonable point, but I hope that they don't touch that too much, because it is one of the most important parts of a headset, because you've literally got it right on your eyes, right? So you need it to look good if it's going to take over your entire field of vision. I could also see them reducing both audio and speaker and that those are the same thing, speaker and microphone and camera quality a bit. And the camera quality also affects what you see because of the pass-through, so it can't reduce that too much either. But reduce everything just a notch, and then hopefully that's enough to get it into a reasonable price range.
Yeah, we say reasonable. I mean, I don't know what's the lowest they could go, but still hit these like actual usable visual metrics and everything we just discussed. $2,000, like almost half price, or so. It's like what, 40% reduction? I'm not sure.
Like if they want even remotely close to mass market appeal, I don't think they can go much above that.
Yeah. I mean, an ideal is like, I mean, even 1,000's a lot. I mean, that's like a lot. A Valve Index or whatever it's called is like $1,000, I think.
Yeah, but that one does need to be tethered to a PC, right?
It does, yeah.
My hope, fingers crossed, toes crossed, all of would be like 1,500, but I don't think they can get there without compromising too much. But that would be what I was like set as the
I think they need the $1,500 price point for people to not be like, oh my god, my wallet. But can they deliver it? Maybe there's just advances in their own internal tech or whatever, materials or whatever, but simultaneously, as we see in the world, prices are up as well. Material cost in particular. Not to get all into economics, but it's just true. Material cost is up, so yeah.
And then you're sitting there making like calculations. Ooh, it's got an M2 in it, and if I don't buy a headset but just a MacBook Air, I can get this for like $400 when it comes out, right? And it's just
yeah. So I think they're in a little bit of a rock and a hard spot or whatever. But they put themselves into it by starting with like the upper ceiling premium, $3,500 version. But yeah, so interesting device, but they also, it not only needs to justify itself by revenue and cost, it needs a use case that people will regularly want to engage in. Now, I haven't used one myself, and from what I've read of the experiences, blogs, reviews, most people say it's really cool, but then after a while, they're like, I don't really have a great reason to keep going back to it. In my
it's a problem looking for a solution or whatever they say, right? It's,
something like that.
Solution in search of a problem.
Yeah, so I don't know what that would be.
I mean, given what we're doing here, I think our ideal solution would be we'll add a bunch of great games to it and you've got a market, right? Because VR gaming is a big use case for VR. But on the flip side of that, as you pointed out with the Valve Index, if gaming is your primary intended use case, then there are products that are more directly catering to that, that are significantly cheaper. Don't offer all of the hardware you don't need for that use case, because having an M2 in there that is not quite powerful enough to run AAA games on a headset level in good fidelity on its own if you then also need to tether it to some other device like a Mac or whatever, well, that's unnecessary, but then that's, there because you also need the whole visual computing thing that Apple wants the Vision Pro to be. So are you just better off getting a different headset if your primary usage is gaming, right? But in any case, gaming would add a use case to it that you then could add to hopefully a big list of other use cases that it gets throughout. It's like,
yeah, because there's definitely, from what I've seen, a lot of really cool VR games, whether on the Quest or the Index or whatever. And I don't even know if the Vision Pro has games. I know they have experiences, which are like pseudo games, but I'm not sure there's like outright games.
There's been a few small games that have come to it over the lifespan of the product. Nothing huge. It's all been like very small, simplistic. Think Fruit Ninja, though I don't know if Fruit Ninja is on there. I think it is actually. But that sort of experience where it is a game. You're cutting fruit with your hand,
right?
But there's no huge games on it, to my knowledge.
Right.
But it's again back to the problem of it's got an M2 in there. There's no wired way of tethering it to a device. So if you want to utilize the performance of a big, powerful M4 Mac Studio or whatever, whenever that comes out, the only way you can connect that to the Vision Pro is basically AirPlay, right? It's got a separate system to connect to the headset that uses foveated rendering to only render the parts it needs and all that jazz. But so it's better latency than AirPlay, but still, it's not going to be, from an input latency perspective, the same as tethered, and I don't know. So this is like, they could maybe do something with that in the future, but they're not utilizing that for anything other than Mac Virtual Display right now.
Yeah. So
anything you run on it will have to run on that M2 and the R2 coprocessor or R1 or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And the limited memory capacity of the device and such. So you have some big limitations in terms of putting big AAA games on the device.
Right.
Unless they open up more for that tethered experience later on.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't really know what the plan is for that. I've heard a rumor saying that they're working with Sony to add support for the PlayStation VR controllers.
Interesting.
Yeah, and like Apple already has support for PlayStation controllers in macOS and iOS, and also Xbox for that matter. But they tend to get really early support for PlayStation controllers in their system. Like, the moment a new PlayStation came out, like with the PS5, macOS already had drivers for the controller and stuff, including the adaptive triggers and all the fancy features of the controller. So I could definitely see there being some credence to the rumor of PSVR controllers on Vision Pro. But just like we already talked about with use cases, unless we see a significant increase in focus on games, I don't see why, because the whole idea of the Vision OS is that it's all seamless in your environment. You just grab something with your hands and move it around, and there's super advanced finger tracking and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And unless it's because you need a lot of buttons for various game functions that would be awkward to just put in your hands, like open inventory or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Why? So I don't know if there's some idea of bringing PSVR games over or tethering it to your PlayStation Remote Play app or whatever, right? But then again, we're looking at streaming with input latency, and input latency is one thing when you're streaming to a traditional LCD, but when you're streaming straight to a headset with motion, that can be problematic.
I bet. Yeah.
So I really don't know what the idea there is, but I guess we'll see if any of that comes to pass.
I hope so. Yeah, I think it needs games as a increased market share attraction reason, because
there's also been a lot more 3D cameras coming out recently with a focus on targeting the Vision, Apple Vision as a platform for viewing all those captures. Like Blackmagic recently announced a 3D camera that costs like $30,000, but
good lord, yeah,
professional cameras, they get wildly expensive. Canon has a D7 3D or something like that. That's a 3D camera specifically intended for the Vision Pro and stuff. And then, of course, you can shoot your own videos on the higher-end iPhones with multiple lenses. So I think there's going to be more and more video distribution that utilizes the spatial features. Yeah. Which is also a cool use case, but...
It is.
Yeah.
Very expensive one.
Very expensive one. But, if you take that to the professional level and imagine the next Avengers film or whatever in full Apple Visual Spatial experience... I could see that being something that, in addition to other things like gaming or whatever else the use cases might be out there, adds to that value proposition. But I don't think that there's one thing that needs to happen for the value of this thing to justify itself, but many things that need to stack on top of each other. Like films, like games, like perhaps other things outside of entertainment. But
Yeah, I'm not sure. It needs to be... or at least as close to be, it has to be a improved version of a phone or laptop experience, because you can do all of these things already on phones and laptops and desktops. You can play games, you can watch news, you can watch movies, though I don't tend to do that on my phone, but a lot of people do.
Improved or at least differentiated enough to justify doing that instead of utilizing one of the other devices.
Not only just the cost of it, but the sheer convenience. You can't just whip the headset out of your pocket and read a message, say something. You got to go and put it on, and I don't know if it needs to boot up or this or that or whatever it does. It needs to be smooth, accessible. Justify, again, the price is one barrier. Let's say you've gotten past that. Then you need a reason to go and bother to have a space to use it. If you're going to walk around and use it, whether it's your room, bedroom, kitchen, living with people, whatever. Or maybe people also already tend to have entertainment setups. May not be 3D, but a lot of people make a nice couch and speakers and a screen and whatever. Okay, that's your little mini movie theater already. Okay, so you need all these reasons, whether it's entertainment or maybe it's just information or FaceTime communication, whatever it is. You need a really good reason.
And different experiences cater to different needs. Like the big living room setup you can enjoy with other people. That becomes more difficult with Vision. They have thought about that, and that you can there's a toggle to mirror what the Vision sees on a phone or whatever, but that's not as much of a shared experience as it is it's like if I'm watching a Twitch stream or something, I'm not sharing that with the streamer, I'm just observing it. It's
I mean, I can see the potential of it in many ways, but I think it's very early stage, even though it's been out for a bit. But if they make it really next level, more affordable, easier to use, more wider application, I think the market will naturally be bigger for it. More people will buy it because there's more use cases and more, not just use cases, but consistent use cases. I'm going to pull out my Vision Pro today for XYZ thing to do, or maybe every single day.
I really think they can do something interesting on the games front as well, because I just remembered that, I'm pretty sure Fruit Ninja is out on it, and it wasn't just a tech demo I saw.
Right.
It might have been a tech demo, but I'm pretty sure it's out. But I saw where someone was playing Fruit Ninja or something similar to it, and they chopped this melon in midair over their own kitchen counter, right?
Yeah.
And it interacts with the physics of the room, so the melon slice lands on their kitchen counter and slides off and lands on the floor. That sort of physics you cannot get outside of that device, basically, right? Other VR headsets don't model the environment you're in the same way either. And that does require that you're building game experiences that specifically cater to this device, which I don't see big budget games doing that anytime soon. But if you did, then you could make some unique experiences with that. It's a huge limitation that you need the game environment to fit your environment for this to make sense. But it's also something that has potential in making fun. I don't know. Now we're saying experiences again, because I don't know how much you can make a big, 60-hour game or whatever out of that. But you could certainly make something fun out of it that's unique to this device.
Right. I agree. Once again, a reason to pull it out, and not just one time, here's a cool one-off show you, dazzle you tech demo type thing, but something you come back to. And we want to replay, review, reuse, whatever it is. Like, if it can do that, or at least start to do that in multiple areas, way more appealing. And again, way more justifying its price.
Yeah.
Whether it's reduced from where it is now or whether it stays where it is now, but at least like make it this repeatable use device the way a laptop, desktop, or phone is, you know, and then it's like, okay, it's expensive, but I use it all the time. Yeah. And it gives me this cooler, different, or improved experience over my other cheaper devices, which I also may or may not own. Therefore, I'm happy to keep it and not sell it off or whatever, or avoid buying it in the first place. So yeah, I mean, Apple's capable of it. You know, they're obviously a brilliant company overall. I don't think the Vision Pro is a failure. It's just, I don't know, it just needs more. It's like an early access tech device.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe it gives.
Missing a lot of features, but here's the maybe potential roadmap, you know, where it could be in a year or 2 or 3 or whatever. So yeah, I do have high hopes for the Vision Pro as well. Or yeah, high hopes, high dreams, whatever. Because I would like one day, but again, I need it to be at the level we're talking about where it's worthwhile to buy and use on a regular basis, not pull out once every now and then and, oh, this is cool or whatever. Yeah. Too expensive for that. I mean, yeah, for sure. Yeah. But yeah, let's see what Apple does. You know, they've got the foundation. Can they build the house or whatever?
Yep.
Yeah, cool stuff. All right. So that's 2024. That's maybe 2025. We've talked about a few things that are even beyond 2026, 2027 range. Yeah, but everything's looking good. We'll be back next year in about a month, approximately. Week 3 or 4 of January for another show. See if we can get Ted, Sam, or Lily on. Sam's been really hard to catch since his schedule changed. He's around, but he had appointments today, so he's unavailable. And Lily is officially on leave from her flight school training. So she's like, freedom. So she's been like crunching for the last several months in school and like hardcore Army training and all this stuff and her chopper stuff. So she's like, she usually makes an effort to show up. If you recall, I think it was last year, she was like sitting in a car, freezing her bum off, like to join the show. Time, yeah. So I do not begrudge her some time off. Yeah. So, Casper and I are pretty much always here. Hopefully we can grab some more team members, maybe for a little recap of their own, next year, or even just going into next year. We'll see. But yep, Mac Gamecast will continue into 2025 and beyond. As long as there's stuff to talk about, we'll be here.
Yep.
And it seems like there'll be quite a bit in the first half of 2025. There should be a lot of fun stuff. So,
and then who knows what will be announced for the second half.
Correct. That's where I'm like, ooh, what's the juicy stuff? You know, stuff we don't even know about. So yeah. So thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for sticking with us year after year, old and new listeners. And yeah, we'll be back in 2025 for more Mac gaming and Apple tech and adjacent goodness.
Happy holidays once again.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, happy New Year, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
Stay warm, stay safe, have fun, and we'll catch you in 2025.
Point the rockets away from yourself when you shoot off fireworks.
Good advice.
PSA.
Yes.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for listening. See you next time.